and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs.
Good afternoon. I want to welcome these leaders for coming in to have this very important discussion about some of the most pressing issues of our time. I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit.
That was the Vice President of the United States of America starting...
I thought they kept her locked up these days. No,
no, perpetually masked, but not actually ever locked in prison.
Completely out of. I was thinking out of trouble. Okay, so that was her starting what a.
Daniel, I believe that you responded to this on Twitter saying that this person is what did you say? Sitting on the biggest cache of nuclear weapons in the world, or something like that.
Running, a heartbeat from running the biggest economy on the planet and sitting on the biggest cache of nukes. But what can I say?
The funny thing about this clip.
I'm wearing a black shirt. My pronouns are Reverend and Father. I hope I know what I'm doing in the next hour.
I don't really have pronouns. I don't know. I don't really understand this idea of someone having like their own set of pronouns that follow them around like fluffy clouds. Like pronouns are sort of grammatical constructs, aren't they? That generally rely on a subject. They just tell you.
They take the place of a noun in a.
Yeah, I know exactly. I know what it is. Yeah,
that's what a pronoun is technically. The funniest
thing
about this video, I mean, we didn't share the video, but the funniest thing about the video is that before she says she's wearing a blue suit, she has to look at herself to remind herself what she's wearing.
I'm wearing a blue.
She stops and looks
a blue
at herself.
suit.
Blue. You could excuse if it was Joe Biden doing that.
Yeah, we might be able to. So anyway.
Joe Biden had a bit of a bit of a rough week a few weeks ago. Well, he has a rough week every week, doesn't he? But didn't he read out the lines just sort of blankly off one of those telereader things, like something like
that's happened more than once.
Repeat the line again with emphasis or something like that. It's just completely.
But loads. I mean, loads of people have done that. Jeremy Corbyn did that very very famously. He said the word "strong emphasis" here during the speech.
Strong
Honestly,
emphasis.
You've got one job.
I've had someone do that. I've had years ago someone do that in church in one of these bespoke service booklets and read out, "The vicar will now sit down." Or
all right then.
It's very, very difficult. Any kind of sense of reverence after that.
But with these guys who are professional politicians, it's basically their job to speak in public. That's all their job is.
But they're no good at it. None of them are any good at it. I mean, Boris Johnson, for all his manifold flaws, is actually quite a good impromptu speech giver.
It was funny when he described Keir Starmer as like a discarded bollard on the side of the motorway or something like that. It was quite funny.
But he's always had this. He always had this. He still does this sort of aptitude for rich and irreverent, descriptions like that, which always got him into trouble, of course. But at least he would talk without notes quite often. But and you could tell when he wasn't, because the speeches were awful. But go back 150 years, 200 years, 300 years. People like Pitt the Younger, giving 4-hour impromptu speeches on the state of the slave trade, and the need
I wondered how long it was going to be before you mentioned Pitt the Younger in this.
And go back a few thousand years.
We have to say.
What's wrong with Pitt the Younger? I don't think I've mentioned him before.
Nothing. I mean, Edmund Burke was like that as well. He would do these.
But they were educated men, weren't they? They're educated men. Who were literary and understood, how to give a speech, how to structure their thoughts. It's been lost to us, isn't it? The internet, the computers.
You didn't think Kamala Harris's introduction was similarly spectacular there?
Well, it's spectacular in its own way, isn't it?
Indeed.
But,
before we go any further with this, it probably is worth saying that for people who have not listened or watched this before, that this is Irreverend Faith and Current Affairs, where we three vicars in the Church of England, whatever, technically well, I don't even know what we are, priests, vicars, presbyters in the Church of England. Anyway, we talk about faith and current affairs from our perspective. And if you like this show, as many people do, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/irreverend.
Or you can buy us a coffee.
Yeah, indeed. So Patreon is if you'd like to give a small monthly donation just to keep things ticking over, give us options for the future. If you can't, and you get the episodes early, if you can't commit to that, you can buy us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com/irreverend. So it's like, if you go and watch someone doing some tricks in Covent Garden, they'll say, come on, this takes me effort, this takes me time. Please do consider, if you enjoy this, making a small contribution. And that's just what we're saying with buymeacoffee.com/irreverend. If you like the show, please just go on there, just buy us a coffee, and we really appreciate that. And you can leave a little message of support or encouragement or something else. And I've got a couple of these which I'd like to read out today. So from Ant, massive appreciation for a podcast that truly helped me through the madness and lies of the COVID era by speaking truth, but also one that brings a bit of sense and rationale to my weekly musings. Without outlets like this, there would be no public questioning of the ridiculous and sometimes evil decisions and views spouted by supposed leaders of this world. And this truly resonates with me. Another one here you'll be interested in, Tom. Came to Irreverend via the Daily Skeptic website in 2020 when I lived in England. I was surprised once to hear Reverend Tom mention Brownsea Island and put a picture of it on Irreverend YouTube. Same view of the island from my rented flat overlooking Poole Quay. Last year, moved back home to New Zealand, but the habit of listening to Irreverend lives on. So he must have lived near you, Tom.
Very near me, yeah.
Neighbours.
Yes, almost. Not anymore, though. I used to go there quite regularly. I used to ring the bells on Brownsea Island.
Oh.
But it's actually Branksea Island.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's the name of the church is St Mary's Branksea, even though the island is, in the last 150 years since the church was named, come to be called Brownsea.
Yeah. Is that right? Oh, there you go.
There you
go. Well, there you are. That's good. So also, Tom, you asked a question via me.
You on Patreon?
I've asked this on the Telegram group.
Yeah, Telegram, that's right. Other social media.
Where to go on holiday. If you don't want to go somewhere where you'll be forced to wear a mask and have 10 vaccines and do various other things.
And
Go on.
There've been a lot of replies, but I must say I'm not so interested in places like Scotland, coming back to sort of Portugal where they don't really enforce it, But actually, there's a point of matter here, isn't there? There's a point of they are trying to enforce it, and the government haven't. They just have lazily left these things going. I'm not interested in places.
Portugal is too hot for me anyway.
I like Portugal.
Loads of people are saying Croatia. I'm hearing a lot of Croatia.
I'm hearing a lot of Croatia. I'm quite tempted. I will be looking into Croatia. I just want somewhere where they literally, a bit like here is now, have no rules. They don't even have a rule that everyone ignores. I want places. I want to reward governments with my money that have abandoned COVID restrictions entirely. Yeah. So Croatia sounds like that's the place.
Hungary looks good as well. Basically anywhere in Eastern Europe, probably with the exception of Ukraine, for obvious reasons.
I don't think you get insurance for Ukraine at the moment.
Probably not. Yeah.
No. Okay, so it's good. But anyway, if anyone who's listening have any suggestions, then
or Tom, if anyone owns a property in Vienna,
do you know what? Yeah, obviously, if we've got
Prague or somewhere like that,
our international listeners, it'd be lovely to meet for a coffee if I am down that way.
Yeah. I was more suggesting, Tom, that someone would just let you stay in their apartment in Prague for 10.
That would be
days.
Lovely. That would be lovely. But also, I feel kind of a bit like that was bribery or something, or
bribery.
Not
in
bribery.
What sense is it bribery? Only if you did something. Only if you
quid pro quo
remarried them in an illegal ceremony or something. It's not really, and then it's not bribery, is it? It's
I guess it is.
It's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type stuff. No, I'm just talking about a straightfortrait donation, Tom.
Okay.
They appreciate what you're doing on the podcast.
Come and stay at our place.
Come and stay in Vienna for a week. I'd say yeah, okay. I don't know what's the situation like in Austria. Is it good?
Probably not good. It wasn't great, was it? They were.
They were trying to force vaccination on all their citizens. Yeah,
they went further than any other country. But you never know. They might have come to their senses. Sometimes these things. No, I'd like to know. It'd be good to get somewhere warm. Croatia sounds nice. So I've always
look into it.
I'd like to give a shout out.
Go on, Daniel.
Holidays for those who are having staycations in the southwest, and I've just had tea with Andy and Sue, who are two podcast fans, patrons, and they just walked through the door at the church about a couple of hours ago and said, "Wow, it's you." Andy had actually come to the Irreverend day. Back in May. So we had a lovely hour, and we were able to catch up and find out more. So great. Yeah, if you want to come for a holiday, come to Salcombe or come near to any of our churches. Really.
I get quite.
Do you get any podcast people coming?
I do. People come on holiday to this area. So if you are, do look us up. Burwash. Had a couple pop notes in my door, which has been very nice.
Not as many people come to Nottingham for holidays. Lots of people pass through here because it's in the middle of the country.
I've been on Nottingham to holiday, I must say.
Is that because your family live here, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's not like a tourist hotspot.
I quite like Nottingham. I think it's got lovely where it hasn't been sort of bulldozed in the 60s. It's got lovely sort of industrial Victorian architectural, the warehouses.
There's some good stuff here. There's quite a lot of building sites in the middle of town though.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Daniel, listeners will be very interested to know that you've finally seen Top Gun Maverick. Were you blown away?
I was actually. I went with no preconceptions, having never seen the first film. I know loads of friends have sort of recommended me to go and watch the first one, but I thought after other members of the family had gone and seen it and were really cheering it on, I thought, no, I'm going to give this a go. I'm not the greatest fan of Tom Cruise because of his Scientology stuff, but anyway, went to it and actually thought, oh, this is rather refreshing. There's it's clearly not been scripted by rainbow woke warriors. It's in some ways it's quite a boyish film, but there's a clear hero story. There's lots of stuff about team building and pushing yourself to the limits. I thought, this is great. This is really enjoyable. And the special effects are so good that you had to remind yourself that you're not actually watching real aviation in action. So, all credit to the filmmakers in that respect. And it wasn't like a lot of these Marvel films where you're kind of overwhelmed, by so much special effects and action and battle scenes that at the end of it you're knackered. This got the balance right, and at the end of it, you felt like, I'd like a bit more of this. This is great. So
you know what I really like
glasses, and then nearly crashed the car. No, joking. But
I have actually got a pair of those sunglasses. What I really liked in Top Gun Maverick is the facial expressions of the pilots when they've got their masks on. They're so intense. The eyebrows. I mean, Tom Cruise's eyebrows, just his face just couldn't get more intense in those planes, and many of the other pilots as well.
You can't see it, but if you were to pan Jamie's camera around, there's just a big poster of Tom Cruise up there. I mean, it's really.
I'm a huge fan of the Cruiser. I mean, he's a bit of a nutter. It must be said.
He's not far off pasting Tom Cruise's face onto the little icons he's got in the background, there.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, maybe we could get our logo reworked. Tom, you've not seen Top Gun Maverick, have you?
I'm not. No.
Oh yeah.
I've not seen Top Gun either.
The first Top Gun Maverick is better than Top Gun the original. Top Gun the original, the scenes on the land they're very, very cringy, but the flying's brilliant, and it is a classic, and Val Kilmer is very funny in the original one. Good stuff. We should probably move on and do our Bible stuff. Tom, you're going to do it today, aren't you?
I am. Let me just find the passage I was going to talk about.
So for people who don't, they're new, what we do sometimes at the beginning, well, pretty much all the time, is we have a little reading from Scripture just to, bring to bear the Word of God upon current events in the world we live in. So we're just going to do that now. And Tom,
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to read from the Epistle of Paul to Timothy, the second Epistle of Paul to Timothy, chapter 4, just the first sort of 4 or 5 verses. So here we are. I charge you in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing and by his kingdom. Preach the word, be urgent in season and out of season, convince, rebuke, and exhort. Be unfailing in patience and in teaching. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own likings, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander into myths. As for you, always be steady, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. There we are, 2 Timothy 4.
I don't know what the relevance of that is to talk, Tom, really.
And so let's have some context. First, Timothy is one of Paul's fellow travelers for a number of his missions to different towns, and appears as a co-author in a number of the main Paul letters. Timothy then goes elsewhere. He becomes a bishop. Can you remember where? I can't remember where. First bishop of, is it Antioch? Don't think it's Antioch.
Actually,
I did look it up like literally moments ago. Then it went straight out of my head, and I've closed the page.
I don't think it matters, Tom.
Ephesus.
Was it Ephesus? Okay.
Ephesus, the first bishop of Ephesus. So Paul is writing then to his dear companion, who is not with him, and helping it with how to continue his ministry. I think the key verses for this age are verses 2 and 3, because the reason I like 2 and 3 and not just 3 is because we get a positive image of leadership and then a warning about a negative image of leadership. So the positive image is preach the word, be urgent in season and out of season, convince, rebuke, and exhort, be unfailing in patience and in teaching. Now that's the charge to a bishop, but it's also the charge through the bishop to the bishop's ministers, the presbyters, the elders, which all 3 of us are, the priests, you could call them. The verse 3 then, for the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own likings, is a clear warning against what we're seeing in the church. And we're going to be talking in a moment about Lambeth. And this is an exhortation to bishops, remember, and this is a gathering of bishops at Lambeth, and a number of those bishops are no longer preaching the word, they're no longer exhorting, they're no longer convincing, they're no longer teaching Christianity, but rather they're simply telling their churches what the church is, what the prevailing culture wants to hear, which is that you can be whoever you want to be, you can do whatever you want to do, and God will not only tolerate it but bless it. And that's not the message of the New Testament, which is that God wants you to change and not live in sin.
Sorry,
yeah, no, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, why do people listen to this podcast particularly, and to voices which are, adjacent to ours. And I think a lot of it is, or at least, this person was saying that people do want to hear a strong message from the church, and they want to see the church standing up for what the church has always stood up for and believed in. And the culture, even if the culture disagrees with the church, there is still a certain amount of respect there. If people actually say, no, actually, I'm a Christian, this is what I believe, and this is how I'm not that concerned if you disagree. Whereas the problem is that the church nowadays, a lot of the time, is simply parroting the culture, and with the desire that the culture will love the church for that reason, but it doesn't actually work that way. The culture just despises the church for being false and not saying what it really believes.
I think it's I think is it Douglas Murray who said it? Who is is it Douglas Murray, the right-wing commentator who's gay? It is Douglas Murray, isn't it?
That does fit.
Who has himself said that he would rather see and respect more a church that actually stood against gay marriage. I think he wrote an article about this in the Spectator. Than the church's, which has no will to there's no will to defend its historic teachings. And you know, I agree. I think it's that the church. Certainly, the church shouldn't just be aping what the world thinks is right, because that's just foolish, isn't it? I mean, it's not got the then the world is not beholden to the God. It should be, but it's not. It's fallen, and our inclinations and desires are equally fallen. And not aligned to God. So when we get, and we're going to talk about this in relevance to the Lambeth Conference, and particularly Lambeth 98, and the resolution which was passed, the resolution 10.1, I think it was right, isn't it?
1.10.
1.10,
oh, yeah.
Which affirms a traditional understanding of Christian marriage. Also affirms that no one should be persecuted due to their sexuality, which of course should also be said, and that everyone should be respected and upheld, but does not say that they should therefore be, and this is the big difference, that they should therefore be permitted to continue as they were, as if that was not as if there was not something that needs to be addressed. Which is not the message of Christ. Everyone can come to Christ, but no one should be unchanged by Christ.
Yeah, and we'll talk in detail about that story later, Tom. But you're quite right about that. Should we turn to some more sort of wider world stuff before we get into the joy of the Lambeth Conference 2022? We haven't actually talked about the Conservative leadership contest, even though it's been going on for a few weeks now. And I've got no real desire to do so because I'm not really interested in it, and I don't really think it makes any difference to what's going to happen, because I assume that basically it's going to be the same whether we have either of these two candidates who are left now, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. There was did you see that on Talk TV last night? There was a debate which was ended because the presenter collapsed in the middle of the debate, and the camera was on Liz Truss at the time, and she sort of jumped back and then took sort of a moment, and then just sort of in an extremely wooden way just walked sort of forward out of the camera shot. It was incredibly bizarre moment. But I don't know, have you guys, I mean, do you feel the same way as me about this? Do you have anything to say on, have you got any thoughts on this at all?
I think a couple of weeks ago at the beginning, I was beginning to, I was hopeful that better candidates would come up to the top, and particularly Kemi Badenoch. But it seems like the parliamentary party has a complete disconnect with what the 200,000 or so members want from looking at the polling evidence.
Yeah,
I mean, none of them were.
People are going to have on the ballot two candidates that don't really fire anybody up. A sort of technocrat and a billionaire technocrat and a Margaret Thatcher tribute act. Who was a former, who's now embarrassingly a former Lib Dem
Remainer,
activist Remainer. I can't see how anyone can get excited. There's no coherent vision here for the country, and this feels like a shuffling of the decks. Really, I've heard from Toby Young was saying yesterday that there's actually a campaign to bring back Boris that's gained momentum. I'm not sure how I feel about that either, but
just says it all, doesn't it?
maybe it'll save the £500,000 wallpaper.
I'm tempted to agree with you, Daniel. I think, I mean, on the one hand, Rishi Sunak's been trying to sort of position himself as the skeptic's sort of choice, hasn't he? Because he apparently argued against the third lockdown, or what would have been the fourth lockdown, the Christmas lockdown. He flew back from wherever he was.
Legend flew back. Maybe he was listening to Irreverend,
Maybe. Well, he could have been.
But he is this, Tom. I'm not sure I find this convincing. Lord Frost commented on this when he was being interviewed by Freddie Sayers, and he said a number of things. There's the backbenchers, and there's Lord Frost himself who resigned. There was a number of different things that press. It wasn't just Rishi. In any case, he'd had 3 lockdowns to resign or complain about, and he didn't. So why would he suddenly complain about this one? I mean, it's a joke, isn't it? Yeah. And yesterday I saw. I mean, I didn't watch this debate. I just watched a couple of clips because, as I say, it just doesn't interest me. But he was saying, I heard him saying, "Yeah, if we borrow more money, then that's our future. That's our children paying that back, and that's our grandchildren paying that back." And I was just thinking, this guy's like overseen the most extravagant borrowing regime that we must have ever gone. Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe we borrowed more in the Second World War.
Actually,
but
I believe it's more. We've spent more than we did in the Second World War.
Yeah. Oh, is that right? It's extraordinary.
I don't even have any tanks to thank for it, do we? I mean, we have nothing,
It's extraordinary now. He's saying we can't have any tax cuts because we can't borrow money. I'm just thinking, this wasn't your attitude. If it was his attitude, he obviously didn't believe it strongly enough to resign over it, which is the only way you could really judge it, isn't it?
I mean, half £500 million overspend is quite substantial, actually, isn't it? Really, when you.
I mean, also he is right though, isn't he? I mean, we can't keep borrowing to fund tax cuts to just keep going round and round. I mean, unfortunately, he's right, but.
Well, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, Tom, I'm not really that interested, but I can see an argument. Like Lord Frost makes this argument for having tax cuts whilst things are particularly bad, and then what do you call it? Sort of spreading out the way that we pay the money back. But even so, I think this is all sort of funny money, isn't it? This isn't real money we're talking about. This is just these crazy numbers. And the thing that really annoys me is all these green levies, which are just, for this useless technology, which we should just cut immediately, all of it. And
it's extraordinary, actually, how much we're paying on that. If you've got a typical household bill, which they reckon by October will be £3,500. You could be paying £800 to £1,000 in terms of green levy, so that corporations can create windmills or what have you at some point in the future. Why they can't actually do that off their own back, I don't quite understand. Why they need.
Because it's a sort of state corporatism, isn't it? What they're doing is the risk is held and the investment is taken by the taxpayer, whereas the income, the profit, is taken by the corporation, and they walk away quite happy. Why would they? Why on earth would they invest themselves? They're not. There's no. It's not good enough technology to make any money out of. And then I mean, I'm a little bit more sympathetic towards Liz Truss. I mean, I kind of at least. She's talking about making the state smaller. I think that's something that needs to happen. I strongly suspect that a lot of the problem is going to be we're going to discover that when you don't have any money, you can't afford the sort of state that we're trying to have, and you certainly can't afford endless regulations and endless kind of health and safety stuff. It's got to go. We just can't afford it. We need to be competitive, and we need to be free of the overweening nanny state.
I know what you're saying, Tom, and I agree. I just don't believe in either these. I don't believe that Liz Truss really wants to shrink the nanny state, or that these people want any less control over us than they currently have. I don't really buy it. I don't think she's ideologically driven at all. Like Daniel said, she's a Remainer. She's a former Liberal Democrat. I mean, why should we believe anything these people say? I'm sorry. That's my attitude. I don't believe it. That's my view. Sorry. I know that's a bit of a conversation stopper, but that's why I haven't brought this up for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah,
So,
well, it's also very dull, isn't it? Everyone is talking about it.
so it's so dull.
I've
honestly.
noticed Unheard have released a series of very statist essays calling for some sort of return to Macmillianism and big states Toryism, which failed then and would fail again. And a load of other people are complaining about the housing crisis being the core of things, and neither of them seem to have any intent of solving that. The real thing that will solve the housing crisis, of course, is we need to build more homes, but if you look at the population statistics, I think you'll probably find that it's uncontrolled immigration and the split up of families that are driving pressure on houses. Not, if you eliminated both of those things, then you would have enough housing stock. So if you have a divorced couple, then you suddenly need 2 houses.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? The whole thing is an ideological problem. What we actually need is actual conservatives. I've been reading an advanced copy of Yoram Hazony's book, Conservatism. What's it called? A Rediscovery. He's going to be coming on the podcast. He's a fantastic thinker and communicator. But, his sort of summary of what conservatism is historically is historical empiricism, which means basically about seeing what works over time, nationalism, religion, an executive basically limited executive power. And the fifth one is individual freedoms. And that forms a coherent conservative philosophy. And you have to think, like, how many of these so-called conservatives believe in any of that, any of it? Historical empiricism, the family, religion, institutions, limited executive power, and individual freedoms. I'm not sure these people believe in any of these things. So
I'm shocked to hear recently that if you add up all the taxation, the fuel duty, say that the cost of utilities, you end up with a higher tax bill. You end up with less pay at the end of the day that is yours to take home and use as you will than people did, say, in the Soviet times.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah,
it's about 59%.
Yeah,
of our income actually is going back into the state machinery.
Yeah, we're so far away from anything resembling.
We're taxing, vatting, taxing the tax and taxing the taxpayers and so on, that we've got, we've got what, sort of 30-40% of our income left.
Yeah, it is shocking.
How can just on a pragmatic side, how can an economy have any life and dynamism in that, and morally and ethically, that just seems, where is all this money going? Yeah,
a friend of mine who's he's an academic, he's a biblical studies academic, has written a really interesting blog where he's arguing that from a biblical perspective, the mark of a free nation is that a free nation that can prosper economically is that it's taxed in inverted commas, 10% plus, 2 or 3 extra, as it was in 2 or 3% extra, as it was in the Mosaic law, because, the Lord demands a tithe, and there are a couple of other things as well, but essentially it's 10% plus a little bit. And what happens I think it's in 1 Samuel, is it 1 Samuel 8 or 1 Samuel 9? The people of Israel demand a king. And one of the things that the Lord says to Samuel against this is that the king will tax them another tithe, which would make it 20% plus, and that this would essentially be a mark of the nation's servitude to what we would call nowadays the state. So, if you compare that to what you've just said, Daniel, let's say 25% would constitute a heavy burden of taxation, whereas today we're talking about 50% plus.
50%.
It's quite funny. I was chatting about because of course we assume that, because you always tend to, that things sort of are how they always have been, but actually the idea that with tax at this level, that the ordinary person in this land is taxed at that level is actually quite modern. Go back to just the beginning of the 20th century. All you've got are pretty much for most people are the church tithes, and not much else. income taxes really is for the wealthy. The state's much smaller. And I was chatting to someone about this, and I was saying, I wonder whether people might rather go back to the point where they paid 10% of their income to me rather than 70% of their income to the state. And he said, I think they'll probably take that deal. Not that I'm particularly in need of material assets. It's not something I particularly want, but it's just quite people don't realise.
The thing is your church, properly organised, could probably deliver some of the services that the authority does if more efficiently and laser in on proper need. I mean, this came to me a couple of instances. I saw this. One was, do you remember Gordon Brown's big plan in his first bid as Chancellor was to bring in these sort of parent and toddler groups, state parent and toddler groups, I want to say Homestead or something, Homestart groups. And what I found in both churches that I worked is Homestart were run by people who had no sense of who was who locally. And they tried to put on events. In the end, they started to panic because they wanted to put on events that actually demonstrated that they were doing something and worth the jobs that they were doing. But so you end up with this kind of feedback circle where they're constantly sort of plumping themselves up as an institution, and we found in several parish situations that they just didn't know the lie of the land. And yet they would have 2 or 3 employees, they'd have budgets, and they'd put on things that just didn't scratch where people were itching. And the same actually happened, I think, with Job Club. I worked in an agency trying to get people who had head injuries back into employment. And it was very clear that actually the churches were much more on the ground in terms of what jobs were available. Whereas if you went into a job centre, I mean, it was just job centres in terms of the people who work there seem to be the most depressed individuals I've ever met, completely uninspired to actually motivate anybody towards work. The systems. Remember, you used to go into a job centre and you pick up a little card.
I've never been in one.
You're not. Oh, you're missing something, Jamie.
Yeah.
Pick up Jamie, go into a job centre just for an eye opener to see what it's like.
Yeah, I will.
You used to go in and there would be a postcard with a job, and you'd go to the desk and maybe get a few more details. And if you didn't ring them up, they rang them up, and you went for an interview, an hour or so later. And it was, the new systems came in computerized. You'd go in and you'd have to work out, which part of the Google map you were on. A lot of these people were just freaking out looking at these touch screens. You had no sense of what was around. Staff sat there looking utterly bored, and like in the supermarkets or the banks, just said, "Oh, why don't you just go to the self-service rather than use us as a human being?" And I remember thinking, gosh, if I put a few desks up in our church hall and put a shout out in the parish magazines for jobs available, I'm sure I could do quite a good job agency and get people employed quite quickly. But there's no motivation here. And yet I bet you these job centres, millions are poured down their throats.
Yep.
And my experience of, because I did spend some time having to go to a job centre between jobs, and I was quite a lot younger. My experience was that they're not actually interested in, are you looking for jobs? I was looking for jobs. They're interested in, had you filled out the online form correctly? That's what they wanted. They wanted you to show, that you'd been looking for jobs and evidence it, but you didn't actually, that could be just typing a search term into Read or something, some other, there's no. Actually, you could sit there forever and just take the dole. I mean, it's not enough to really live a worthwhile life, so I didn't. But no, it is. I mean, it's supposed to be a safety net, isn't it? And it was at that point still set at a safety net level where you were uncomfortable, but you could live, on it. if you're a solo adult. But it was very, very depressing going in there and doing endless sort of personality quizzes to find out what jobs you should be applying for. And the computers told me that you are going to be really good at going in for IT jobs, so apply for all the IT jobs. I was like, well, I don't have any experience in IT. No, just apply for the IT jobs. Okay.
One occasion I did go in between parishes. I was told traffic warden.
Really?
Yeah. Computer says you'll be a traffic warden.
I've just worked for God. I'm not working for Satan.
I did one when I was at school, and it said to be, I think, a grave digger or like a funeral.
Actually, I think you'd be a great grave digger. Actually, I can. Well,
I do have the upper body strength, so yeah.
They use machines these days, Jamie.
Yeah, what, to dig graves? Really?
Yeah.
They're not used. They use like like a digger, which would be manually operated. Yeah. Yeah, well, I could do that. I could do that as well. No problem.
Even in death, there are robots.
What's that? Sorry.
Even in death, it's robots.
It's always
It's not a robot. I mean, it's run by Mark. He sits in it and digs a hole.
Like a car is not a robot, is it? It's
I don't know. They're getting quite close.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that the Tesla cars are kind of robots, aren't they? Anyway, so any thoughts on the Conservative leadership contest? I don't care who wins. I don't think it makes any difference, and I don't really have any solutions.
I think that the level of change needed requires a leader who's prepared to take an enormous amount of flack and pain, and I just don't see that in these two individuals.
Yeah, I mean, Liz Truss, I don't mean this in a nasty way, but she's so devoid of, I mean, it's going to sound nasty, but she's so devoid of charisma, isn't she? I mean, she just has no personality that comes across anyway, in terms of her public presence. Now, I'm sure she's a very nice lady, but, I don't know anything about her. So, I hope she's a nice lady, but do you know what I mean? It's just like when you watch her, there's not any kind of real personality there. And Sunak is just like a kind of, cardboard cutout corporate technocratic entity. It's just, it's depressing. Anyway, let's move on to something. Sorry. You've got to laugh. You've got to laugh. What's that? Sorry.
Before our listenerships fall off.
Yeah, exactly. Before people start falling asleep. So a little bit on, before we get to the church stuff, we've got a couple of articles here. I guess this is about the whole transgender agenda as it applies to children. I guess that's the way that you might characterize these two articles. So one is one that I flagged up, which I'll just do a little bit on. Tom, maybe you could talk. Tom, you shared the other one, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Which is quite a remarkable story. The one that I came across was this. It was retweeted by Stonewall, and it's in the Metro, which I haven't done a survey, but it seems to me that the Metro must be the most woke of all papers in the world. But this is the headline is "My 4-year-old is gender non-conforming, but her nursery does not respect that," which is a remarkable. It's a remarkable article. It starts with the words, "In the months before she started nursery, my 4-year-old daughter would often say she was a boy. It came unprompted, bubbling up from somewhere pure and certain inside of her," which is kind of interesting because almost at the end of the piece, the person writing it throws in just off the cuff that I don't even know what the right pronoun is because it's hard to follow, but this person is a trans man. So it's like, it says, it just came out of nowhere. My daughter just started thinking that she was a boy. And so it came from somewhere pure and certain. It had nothing to do with the fact that I identify as the opposite sex to what I actually am.
Sounds almost like Munchausen by proxy.
it's so disingenuous. Anyway, the point of this article, just briefly, is that when she went to nursery, she was corrected when she said she was a boy, and now she feels like she can't be who she really is, etc., etc., etc. But the thing that I find so disturbing about this is the rhetoric about how the government is not doing enough to police this ideology. Let me read you just a little bit. Transgender awareness in early education is still being fought for by LGBTQ plus charities like Mermaids and Stonewall, but it's yet to be implemented as a standard by government besides anti-bullying policies. Regarding trans and gender non-conforming students, a government briefing published in 2020 states that decisions on uniform mixed activities and availability of toilet and changing facilities will be made by schools themselves. But listen to this. The same report said that...
there, isn't it?
Yeah. Listen to this, though. Seriously, this is really serious. The same report said that, quote, so this is from a government briefing published in 2020, quote, all pupils should receive teaching on LGBT relationships during their school years, end of quote. And Ofsted inspectors will mark down schools if they fail to comply. And then this guy continues, or this woman, I forget which, but this doesn't specify the importance of teaching children to be kind to their trans classmates in the early years. And as for the compulsory education of teachers and school officials on this front, it's tumbleweeds all the way. So you see what this person is saying is like schools and teachers should be made to be educated themselves in the transgender ideology. And then the same kind of thing that's already happening in terms of LGBT relationships being taught in school should be carried out in terms of teaching children more, I don't know how to say, like more specifically about transgender issues in schools. So it's just, I don't know. I just thought it would be, I just think it's good to be aware of what's actually going on in schools, and to know, especially that this is the government's position. All pupils should receive teaching on LGBT relationship during their school years, and Ofsted will mark schools down if that does not happen. So this ideology is being pushed in all state schools.
Yep.
And if it's not, then schools will be marked down by Ofsted.
I have a feeling you've lost the right to take your children out of it. I think you're no longer allowed to take your children out of the lessons where they do that. So it's sort of doubling down on that. Mind you, it doesn't stop schools from teaching them as a fact, without moral without any moral sort of emphasis on it. So if you were to have a Christian school, you would still have to teach about that there are such things as LGBT relationships and marriages, etc., but you are allowed to say that Christians believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. You know, that is allowed. Of course, most schools don't do that.
I mean, we know from the Bernard Randall story that the issue will be that even church schools will feel pressured or decide to embrace this wholeheartedly or go beyond what is being requested. It's rather chilling and haunting, isn't it, that a conservative government would not have its eye on the ball when it came to Ofsted, to give Ofsted that kind of power. I mean, let's not forget, Ofsted results have an enormous impact on our countries. Even house prices can be affected by Ofsted results. How many people are going to in schools be pressured as teachers to lose their jobs if they don't sign up to this?
I think the other really sad thing about this is this last one, where this sort of trans man, so this woman who thinks she's a man is willing the same confusion and disorder on her child, and it's really sad. Here we are. I worry for her that she isn't trans. It seems to be coming across like well, actually, why would you, even if you're being, even if you yourself are a trans man, why would you wish that on your child? Why would you want it? Why wouldn't you think, well, maybe it's just so buying into her own.
Earlier on in the article, she talks about the way her daughter has stopped talking about the way she's a boy, and she attributes this to what happens in the school. Yeah. Rather than just thinking, well, maybe sometimes children just say that they're the opposite sex just because especially if their mummy to say that.
Especially if their mummy is pretending to be a person of the opposite sex. I mean, it's going to confuse the child, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, I mean, the thing I find most chilling about this piece is the way that this person clearly sees that the way to push this agenda is to weaponize education in schools. There's this one line here: because education is the one weapon powerful enough in the fight against ignorance and hatred. Because a child's potential is too precious to be squandered on teaching them to fear and hate themselves. This person realizes that the way to win this ideological war is to target the education of children. It's such an important thing. And I go back to the stuff I've heard Rod Dreher saying and others, and I think they're absolutely right, is that if you, as a Christian, if you think that you can just educate your children in the same way that everyone else does, and in the way that we would have felt comfortable doing 30, 40 years ago, think again, because this is a rapidly changing situation. And it's, if you send your kid to a state school without considering this, you're going to get a shock, because it's government policy, basically.
And Jamie, it's not just in the PHSE curriculum. It's in even the STEM subjects.
Yeah.
It's certainly in the social sciences, from primary through to secondary, in the way that history is taught, English language, RE, geography. It's all there. Every subject is tainted with this.
Yeah.
There's quite an interesting article responding to this Metro article in The Critic. It's called "Another Stone in the Wall," and it's written by a gay, a lesbian woman, I think, by the reading of it. This is the last. Can I just read the last two paragraphs? Because the first one makes an interesting point. Today, trans kids, it's in inverted commas, are in every school. Once they would have been seen as kids who don't conform to sex stereotypes, so-called tomboys and sissies. Such kids only present a problem for the narrow-minded, for those who want to shape behaviour to neatly fit pre-packaged sex stereotypes. And that's quite a good point. Actually, a lot of this is very much putting woman back in a box, isn't it? Oh, you're a woman or a man. You know, let's take a woman. You're a woman who's a bit of a tomboy. Oh, that means you must be
a man. Yeah,
a man. You know,
you don't like wearing dresses and wearing nail varnish and plaiting your hair and stuff. Yeah,
you know, and Jordan Peterson makes the point that, you know, the bell curve of femininity and masculinity overlap, you know, and it's perfectly possible to be a woman who is more manly, and it's perfectly possible to be a man who is more feminine. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you not a man or not a woman. Anyway, that's the first thing. The second paragraph. There was once a homophobic trope that gays were out to get children. For years, Stonewall and grassroots campaigns fought to show the heterosexual mainstream that gays, lesbians, and bisexuals aren't a risk to children. Today, by promoting this dangerous delusion of the trans child, imported wholesale from the US, Stonewall could encourage damaging ideas and assumptions. Parents of all sexual orientations are right to be wary of what is being pushed under the banner of inclusion. Now, actually, I would like to push back a little bit against that. I don't think that gays are out to get children. I think that would be wrong to say. But I think even Peter Tattersall has acknowledged that that when you change what, you know, you could, the Overton window of permitted sexualities, those who are say bisexual, or, you know, it's possible to encourage people to take identities that they wouldn't have done. If, you know, it's possible to, you know, quite rightly, the Christian life is about suppressing sin in us and embracing goodness in ourselves. If you stop suppressing something that's sinful, then it could well become part of your identity. If you let it, and so if society wants it to be, if society lets it happen, then you could end up encouraging more children to be to identify as gay or lesbian, and who would have been quite happy as a sort of heteronormative, if you want to call it that, you know, person, if that hadn't been an option.
I watched a couple of days ago Matt Walsh's Daily Wire documentary, What is a Woman?
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
you've seen that? It's absolutely excellent. And I thought what was interesting is halfway through, when he talks to a psychologist, an old-fashioned style psychologist, who says, you know, that gender dysphoria on the whole is a sort of 1 in 100,000 potentially 1 in 30,000 individuals have a sort of self-loathing of their biological sex, but that kind of belief in a lot of clinical practice is considered, archaic and dinosaur-like. But the rest of the documentary was very, very insightful to all the lines in the sand that are being drawn in the culture wars and all the sort of hysterical triggers that that were demonstrated. I mean,
yeah, I love the bit in What Is a Woman where he's talking. I can't remember. It's like to some Asian Americans in LA or something, and he says, he's basically discussing this thing about your truth, like, so can anything be my truth? And they're sort of saying, yeah, anything can be my truth. And then he says, well, what if my truth is that I don't exist? And they're sort of like, well, that's fine. That's true for you. And he's like, well, there is no me,
There was a video about that a few years ago, wasn't there? I remember watching it whilst I was at Cuddesdon. Michael Milmean found it, which was a chap going around and saying, so I'm allowed to, my truth matters. Can I identify as a woman? Oh yes, you can identify as a woman. Can I identify as a Chinese woman? Yeah, you can identify as a Chinese woman, I guess. Can I identify as a 6-foot Chinese woman?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting in the comments on the Telegraph article you shared, Tom, which we should just do in a minute. But they say, well, how come? So this is about a drag queen, right? So being a drag queen apparently is okay. So, but why is it not okay to be a white person and apply black paint your face and pretend to be a black person? It seems to be a strange contradiction. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So this article is the first ever drag queen story time for primary school children was stormed by protesters and forced to stop happening. There's been an awful lot of ballyhooing about this.
It was in Reading.
That
cesspit of bigotry and febrile.
It sounds like something.
Febrile anti-transgender sentiment.
It sounds like something out of a Carry On film, doesn't it?
I'm surprised.
You went a time machine 20 years back and said to yourself that this is what was going to be contentious.
Yeah,
it is extraordinary. This is an extraordinary story, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we condemn violence, but it doesn't sound like there's any violence as such. I don't think
there's any violence. There wasn't any violence at all. There was people chanting, calling this guy a paedophile, saying that he was a groomer, asking him what autogynephilia is, which, to be honest, I didn't know what it was. But that's did you guys see this?
Yeah, autogynephilia is the idea of being sexually aroused by the thought of oneself as the opposite sex. I think it's specifically men. Yeah,
being aroused by thinking of themselves as female. But
and it's potentially one thing that drives quite a lot of trans stuff. But you're not allowed to say that, really. It's forbidden.
Right. Okay.
Verboten.
Yeah, it's quite a story, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah,
I sort of don't really understand. I don't really understand it in lots of ways, because I mean, I'm not saying that I think that this is okay, but the kids' parents booked them into this thing, wasn't it? It was like a ticket-only event, and then you've got this guy who's dressed in a mermaid costume with all the the gay pride colours on him. This kind of outrageous drag outfit. There's a bit here where it talks about the group which he comes from, which is called is the group Drag Queen Story Hour UK? I
think so. Yeah.
It said in a statement, the drag queen sorry, this is the bit I want. Sorry. The drag queen storytime movement began in the US in 2015. It billed as an attempt to promote, quotation, queer role models and the gender fluidity of childhood, and has sparked fury in US schools. Critics contend that the drag movement conflates biological sex and gender. It's interesting, isn't it? Because is that what they say? Isn't it? Aren't they saying that this is like perverse, a man dressing up as a woman and teaching children about queer role models and the gender fluidity of childhood. Isn't that the point, rather than saying there's a conflation of biological sex and gender? So I would have thought critics of this would just say that gender is just a made up concept that is being used to subvert the notion of biological sex. Not sure about that.
That's strange, isn't it? I'm trying to get around the heads of schools and libraries. Why would you invite this? What would be the goals that you would be looking to meet?
Well, inclusivity, Daniel, tolerance.
Well, no, I mean, it says it, doesn't it? It's
education.
It's basically trying to. I mean, it says it on the ticket, doesn't it? To try and teach children about. Where did it? So you read it out. I can't find it now.
Yeah, queer role models and the gender fluidity of childhood. Yeah.
Yeah. Gender fluidity of childhood.
This is education.
They're what they're trying to sell. I mean, I'm just trying to think
that's what they're trying to sell.
Your average sort of, say, primary school or preschool. When do they get round the table and say, "Do you know, we really need to have a drag queen round"?
Yeah, tell stories.
Because that would tick certain boxes. I'm just trying to think, what are those boxes that
tell stories and confuse? But they actively want children to be confused. I mean, that can be the only, they want children to be confused about their sex.
And Ofsted as well. We were talking about earlier.
They want children to be brought up thinking that that sinful lifestyles are absolutely fine, and that they are potentially a different sex to the one they were born and locked in the wrong body. That's what they actually want.
Yeah. Well, listen, chaps, we should move on because we've got this big church story to talk about.
Yeah.
So, listen, chaps, should I just do? I'll tell you what I think has happened, and you tell me if you think it's right. So, the Lambeth Conference is coming up, which is it's once every 10 years, isn't it? The bishops are from the Anglican Communion, which is the Anglican Church all over the world. So not just the Church of England, but the church all over the world get together for a big knees up. And they talk about all sorts of stuff, have lots of prayer and worship, and it's all just generally a lovely time. Interesting fact, yep. I was working in a cafe bar at the University of Kent during the last Lambeth Conference.
And I was the 10 years before that.
What's that, sorry?
And I was there 10 years before that.
What, at Canterbury? Yeah, of course, yeah. So I was on the campus. I was at university at the time, at the University of Kent. And I was seeing all the bishops there. I wasn't an Anglican at the time, so I had no real appreciation for what was going on. But that was happening at University of
I served
Kent.
George Carey his supper one night.
Did you really? What, did you work at the Goldbank King Cafe?
No, I worked at a whole bunch of us from student chaplaincy in 1988 were taken on to basically do some of the sort of
catering stuff,
hotelling service industry end of the Lambeth Conference.
Nice one.
2 weeks, we were around serving prelates and primates and bishops and their officials and apparatchiks. It was sort of interesting to a point.
Yeah. So this happens every 10 years. Now, for people who are not familiar with the way the Anglican Church works, basically there are, to put it very simply, there are more liberal parts and more conservative parts. So the American part, the Episcopal Church, very, very liberal. Church of England, let's face it, on the Episcopal level, it's pretty liberal nowadays. But the Church in Africa is very conservative. So there are tensions within the communion. And
give people an idea of the numbers, percentages, roughly, just so that
you'd be better on that than me, Daniel. You go ahead.
I think the for instance, at Lambeth Conference this year, the Americans, who constitute about 2% in terms of communicants max, in a communion of about 80 million, are sending 100 bishops.
Seems like quite a lot.
Whereas your average Anglican, I think, is under 25, black, female, and lives in Nigeria. I think Nigeria particularly is sort of homeland, really, of global Anglicanism. I think there's around about 20 million communicants, not just I tick the box for Church of Nigeria because they'll hatch, match, and dispatch me, but actually turn up to church.
Yeah, absolutely. So there we go. So that's a bit of context. So basically, my understanding of what's happened is the Lambeth Conference is it's not going to pass any resolutions changing anything in sort of Anglican, official Anglican doctrine or anything, but it's going to make a series of calls. Now, what does that actually mean? I'm not sure. But
no one's sure.
But
No one's sure.
One of the calls was about where is it? I've got it written down here. So it was like cool. It was in this, what is it, like a pamphlet called Human Dignity, or at least I'll just read this out. The first edition of the Human Dignity section of the Lambeth Calls discussion document contained a certain paragraph 2.3, and it seems to me that the bit that's caused the controversy is that it says at one point, Lambeth Resolution 1.10, 1998, so that's from the conference in 1998, states that the, quote, legitimizing or blessing of same-sex union cannot be advised. It is the mind of the communion to uphold faithfulness in marriage between a man and a woman in lifelong union. And it is also the mind of the communion that all baptized, believing and faithful persons, regardless of sexual orientation, are full members of the body of Christ and to be welcomed, cared for and treated with respect. Now, my understanding is that there were lots of liberal people who got very, very upset about this because they don't like the fact that it says that it's the mind of the communion to uphold faithfulness in marriage between a man and a woman in lifelong union. And the two options on the table were that people, in response to these calls, could add their voices to the call and say, yes, I add my voice to the call. Or they could say, I'm not ready to add my voice to the call. There needs to be more conversation. Now, in order to try and appease the very, very angry liberal people, they added a third option, which was to say, I would refuse to add my voice to this call. And this is essentially wrong, although it doesn't say that. But now that has implicated the liberals. They're not happy about being able to refuse the call. So now they've actually altered the paragraph, and the bit about it being the mind of the communion to uphold faithfulness in marriage between a man and a woman in lifelong union has been removed. Now, this is probably still not going to appease the liberals, because the new paragraph still says, oh, no, well, actually, maybe it might, because now it says many provinces continue to affirm that same-gender marriage is not permissible, which isn't really saying anything, is it? So, yeah, in other words, you would think that all the stuff that liberals would object to has essentially been removed, which kind of raises the question of, well, what is actually being implied by the removal of these words? It's the mind of the Anglican communion as a whole that say, is the mind of the communion to uphold faithfulness in marriage between a man and a woman in lifelong union. Does the fact that these words have been removed now mean that it's not the mind of the communion to uphold faithfulness in marriage between a man and a woman in lifelong union? Anyway, chaps, have I basically got that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the revised one, they still quote from Lambeth 1.10 from 1998, which means that it would, in a sort of underhanded sort of, not really underhanded, it sort of acknowledges the existence and continued relevance of that passage, but it doesn't quote from the pertinent bits.
It only says that people should be treated with respect regardless of their sexual orientation.
Yeah, which is true.
Yeah, so the call, the original call, which became contentious and all hell broke loose over the last weekend, from what I can gather, was composed by one of the conservative groups in the Anglican communion. It's not GAFCON, but sort of Global South sort of steering committee, who very much wanted a reaffirmation of 1.10 in the document. And it'd be interesting to see how they react to this. I mean, this particular statement, I mean, it says nothing really at all, does it? I mean,
which statement is that, Daniel?
The new one. The new one is basically, we're walking together, acknowledging our differences, blah blah blah.
That is what it says in 1 Timothy 4, isn't it? Walk together and acknowledge your differences, despite what the Bible says. I'm pretty sure that's Paul's instruction to Timothy, isn't it? Yeah. If you find someone who is teaching doctrine, then walk with them and respect their differences. and and affirm their right to change their mind. Yeah.
All this paragraph does is restate the problem, doesn't it? So many provinces continue to affirm that same-gender marriage is not permissible. Lambeth Resolution 1.10 states that the legitimizing or blessing of same-sex unions cannot be advised. Other provinces have blessed and welcomed same-sex union/marriage after careful theological reflection and a process of reception. As bishops, we remain committed to listening and walking together to the maximum possible degree, despite our deep disagreement on these issues. I mean, it does raise the question of, well, if Lambeth Resolution 1.10 said that the legitimizing or blessing of same-sex unions cannot be advised, why then have other provinces been allowed to bless and welcome same-sex union? I mean, that's exactly the problem right there, isn't it? It's that there's no authority. There's no, all it is just a commitment to walk together, regardless of how it
sort of makes you not really a church, doesn't it? I mean, it certainly doesn't make you a denomination. There's the whole point is that in order to be a church, in order to be an expression of Christ's church on earth, there needs to be discipline.
It was interesting. I thought it was interesting how over the weekend the various Episcopal voices joined in the sort of outcry. Some of them the usual suspects, Ely, Southwark, Brechin in Scotland, Curry from the American Church, and so on and so on. And then subsequently, I noticed this morning there was one bishop from America who was trying to say, well, there are these differences, but they don't massively add up to much. We're each just exploring and feeling our way through this different season, which I thought was disingenuous, really, because, and this is where I think I have a real issue with a lot of the revisionist end of the church, is not truly acknowledging the schism that this presents and the fundamental difference in doctrine, in human identity, authority, and so on. That the danger is that what we've got here could end up with a lot of us having to make a choice between, are we in the Church of England or are we Anglican? And that's pretty awful. But I was surprised also by how many liberals over the weekend on Twitter were saying, well, it's time to, we don't really need to be part of a global communion. And what one priest actually saying, well, it's all very colonialist and we should just get rid of this altogether. We're part of the Western Church, whatever that is,
Is he advocating a return to Rome? It sounds like it.
I doubt it, but we've got to be. I think we've got to be real, and this is like a couple who really, in essence, are living separate lives and are not talking about the reality of it, and are trying to kind of go through for the sake of the children living in the same house.
But they want access to the historical gravitas of Anglicanism without the historical doctrines of Anglicanism. That's why they want to stay in. They could, if they wanted to, go and join a church which has done all these things. Methodism, United Reformed, both. But they. I think
the truth, Tom, isn't it? Is that if you look at the patterns of decline, by the middle of the 21st century, anybody who's signed up to this particular narrative, the sort of narrative that, the Reverend Richard Coles, God bless him, is saying, oh, I wish, the Church of England had this script rather than that script. Well, if we have this script, we should be obsolete. There will be no liberal established Church of England by 2050 because it will not be able to cope against the sort of post-secular deluge.
And I think that's the hope of 20, because the Church of England are going to be talking about these sort of things relatively soon, 2023, and on the one hand, you got Andrew Symes, who runs Anglican Mainstream, saying this. How will faithful Anglicans across the world respond to this rapid capitulation by the communion leadership to the small but powerful revisionist lobby? What implications for the Church of England when it attempts to discuss this early in 2023? Once again, we've had Church of England bishops who are liberal and revisionist being very vocal, and Church of England bishops who are orthodox, and they are out there saying absolutely nothing in reply. Why is, and when we come to talk about the outcome of living in love and faith, what is it just going to be that sort of one-sided storm, and then the Church of England can go, well, we can't, we haven't got anyone to defend this, and off we go into the world of revisionism. What hope?
Lambeth 2052 or Lambeth 2050, they will not be discussing this. I can guarantee you this.
It'll probably be in Nigeria.
It will be in Nigeria, and there will be nobody left here. We will be looking at empty churches.
If it's in Nigeria,
heart of heart, if Anglican Liberal Progressive can come on this show and tell me otherwise, I see no. Even if I believed it, there is no statistical evidence that particular theology grows anything.
No. But the problem is, are they going to see that? Because I've been talking of, we're going to have to lose 20% of the church either way. Which way are we going to go? Are they going to cut the deadwood out and go with the growing church, which is the Orthodox Church, is the evangelical church, in small e, not biggie, the church that has a message to proclaim, a gospel to spread, or is it going to go with and alienate the church that is Orthodox and lose that and end up with an empty husk of a church? That's the choice in 2023 at General Synod, I'm not certain that I have much hope.
No,
based on today, because you'll get the normal suspects all over the press, and the Conservative bishops sat in their offices going, "Oh, what should we do? I don't want to be too contentious. I don't want to upset people."
I mean, one of the things about this, from my perspective, is just the sort of pointlessness of the whole thing. I found on their website the bit about the calls and how they've, how there used to be these two options and now there are these three options. So it can also be announced that bishops will now be given a third option for responding to the Lambeth calls, which are calls as statements on doctrine and practice. When they're discussed during the conference, bishops will now be able to clearly state their opposition to a particular call. The options will be: 1, this call speaks to me, I add my voice to it and commit myself to take the action I can to implement it. 2, this call requires further discernment. I commit my voice to the ongoing process. 3, this call does not speak for me. I do not add my voice to this call. Please continue to pray for all the bishops attending the Lambeth Conference, that we may continue to listen, walk, and witness together to the love of Jesus Christ. It's like, what's the point of getting together to just say whether or not you agree with a call? I mean, what is the problem?
Is this is Welby, isn't it? This is Welby and his sort of mantra.
No, this is Bishop Tim Thornton, who's the chair of the Lambeth Calls subgroup.
It's coming from Welby's constant desire for negotiation and conciliation and reconciliation, and that is he would walk with other people. He just wants to see meaningless conciliation, as far as I can tell.
I mean, it's very hard. I find it's very hard at times to dissuade myself of Newman's accusation in the 19th century that the church becomes semi-Arian. This idea that, well, we won't become fully heretical, we'll become semi-heretical, because that will keep particularly the bourgeois happy. And we don't want to kind of overstate the whole divinity of Christ lest it upset people. So we'll just hold it all in tension, and hopefully God will find some creative way through it. And Arius isn't really that bad after all, anyway.
Good disagreement. Yeah.
I mean, and particularly Do you know, sometimes I think that the most prophetic piece of comedy for the age was the Judean people's front within the script of the life of Brian. You know, what shall we do? Well, I call for a motion against Pontius Pilate. Should we have a motion against Pontius Pilate? Sort of this world competition stuff, isn't it? Oh yes, given the money, I'd build a donkey farm and I also want world peace. I mean, you know, for goodness sake, millions and millions of pounds against down the drain for this chummy gathering.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be fun to be there in a way. It looks to me like it is at Canterbury. It is at the University of Kent. Again, I'm looking at a nice picture.
Irreverend live reporting from.
Yeah, I mean, it's I was there for 4 years. I lived in Canterbury for 5 years. I've got a picture here of Robert Innes on Twitter, and he's there. It's either Keynes College or Rutherford College, looking out. It's got a lovely view because it's on a hill.
Which was your college, Jamie?
I was in Rutherford. Yeah.
Oh, you're a Rutherford.
Which one were you in?
You were in Rutherford.
Yeah. Well, no, the food was very good, actually. Which one were you in?
I was in Keynes.
Oh, you were in Keynes. Oh, sorry, it's Elliot and Rutherford. They're on the top of the hill.
That's right, yeah.
And it's got a lovely view of Canterbury, you know, the city and the cathedral and everything. And they're probably having a great time there. You know, one thing I want to say about this chapter, we talk about bishops quite a lot on the show and blah, blah, blah. And bishops are important, and I wouldn't want to say otherwise, but I think, you know, a lot of people are very sort of confused as to why we're sort of still part of the Church of England. And what I want to say about this is that this kind of nonsense, it certainly doesn't characterize and I'm sure it's true for you guys as well, my everyday experience of what it's like to work and minister in a Church of England church. This is one of the reasons it's so frustrating, is that because we're actually called to be pastors and ministers to real people who've got real problems and real spiritual needs. And, you know, it's our job to try and help meet those spiritual needs to the best degree that we can. And we can't operate like this in this kind of fantasy world where, you know, nobody's sure what we believe, and like, you know, we're walking with people who've got completely contradictory views and blah, 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 and all this nonsense. And there are loads and loads of really great vicars in the Church of England who are doing brilliant work, and they're great churches and great members of laity as well. And the thing that frustrates me about this is I think people think that this actually characterizes what every parish church in the Church of England is like, and it's not true. It's not true at all. This is like I think one of you two said earlier that this is actually a minority who have extreme views and very, very loud voice, but it doesn't represent what the Church of England is like on the ground. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think Twitter in that respect is a very poor reflection, isn't it, really, of the reality and the mix of the C of E. I mean, I'm minded of Jordan Peterson's message to the church last week, you know, stop being an activist and attend to some souls. It's what you're good at. And I think the thing is that most of the vicars who are doing this, attending to the souls,
they don't have time for this.
It's a busy job. It's a busy job. You know, that their lives are somewhat subterranean because of the nature of things. And thank God it is. Yes, that there's a heck of a lot of good people doing a heck of a lot of good work, and in some ways, what's really, really frustrating is the shop front of the C of E doesn't reflect that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. The bishops are in many ways the shop front because they're what people read about and see, you know, in the Daily Telegraph or whatever. It's frustrating, isn't it? Hey, you know what, chaps? You know what? I think it's time to move on to a bit of this. So, Tom and Daniel, Reverends all, I bet you're very excited to know what is the question this week for Question the Rev. And I'm going to read it to you right now. Reverends, what's your views on forming off-grid Christian communities in the UK? Do you see this as a coming necessity or an utopian idea? What an interesting question. Thank you very much. Have you thought about forming some kind of off-grid Christian community, possibly in the woods, and breaking free from all this madness once and for all?
I think it's already happening, but it's not happening in the woods or off-grid. I think what we might call in with a nod to Rod Dreher, Benedict option type communities and networks are already underway. And in a sense, what we're doing is that, isn't it? I mean, Thursday circles and other groups and things.
So Daniel, for people who don't know, when you say the phrase Benedict option communities, what characterizes a Benedict option community as far as you're concerned?
That's, well, a Benedict community is like a little ark. It is a Christian community where there's a real intention to make it distinctly Christian. And you might say the hull of the ship is a bit tighter and a bit thicker than normal, and it's more distinctively Christian and knows its place within the cultural battles that we see, and that harkens back to St. Benedict himself, who unconsciously in his rule gives something of a roadmap as to how we can create communities which live a very deep Christian life in detail, so Rod Dreher's book, The Benedict Option, builds on that. Are there underground churches? I think there's underground networks, and I think there's people beginning to see that if you want to have a genuinely small Orthodox Christian life for you and your family, that there's going to be a cost to that. And maybe you need to share that cost with others. It may be homeschooling networks. And we know, don't we, that on the theological level, if you go right to the other end in terms of theological education, there are networks that are already acting discreetly. But I don't want to say too much. So I don't think it's utopian, maybe dystopian. But I'm struggling to see, as I said earlier on, what else is going to be around maybe in 20, 30 years, sadly, for a while, maybe, not forever, because I think in the end, the parish system is a very good one. But I think we may have a situation in the next generation or so where we're a little bit in exile.
Yeah. I'd add my voice to that call, Daniel. And I'd say, adding my voice to the call, I would say that I think particularly in the areas of education and employment, that this is true. I mean, we were talking about education earlier, but I think employment is also true. Is that in many it is, what's the middle class one? White collar, or is that blue collar? I was getting mixed up. White collars, many white collar sectors now. It's going to be very, very difficult to continue to be a faithful Christian and to not lose your job, basically. So we've got to rethink these things, like with our kids, and if we're thinking about going to university and all this kind of stuff. Like, do I really want to commit myself to this career, which may very well be taken from me if I say, misgender someone, or if I, say something too Christian about marriage or something like that. Or maybe I should actually get a job working with my hands for a living, or learn a trade or something like that. And it might carry slightly less social prestige, but it's going to be more secure in the long run.
Rod Dreher, one of Rod Dreher's sons, has become a car mechanic.
Yeah,
and apparently he's just loving it. He's actually coming back at the end of the day stress-free.
Yeah. Of course.
So maybe there may be something to be said for that. A friend of mine reckoned that if you looked, you could interpret the Babylonian exile. What's that? 5 or 6 centuries before Christ. The Jewish community learned that one of the things that they could do very well is in terms of trade and accountancy and money, and understand the financial world actually quite well. This friend of mine was saying there might be something to be said for Christians who really have a calling to white collar jobs to maybe consider finance and accountancy, because there ain't much culture wars there. It tends to be fairly subdued in that, and to actually be able to understand, say, things like digital currencies and that could have an advantage for Benedict option communities to, where we might want to avoid all the sort of traps that say
Rishi It's going to set
Rishi's vision of a Britcoin, a programmable digital currency where you are in a self-imposed lockdown, or you can only take out plant-based food on Wednesdays, so on, or have your carbon footprint monitored by an app, that actually understanding the world of numbers, just like the Hebrews did in exile, might actually be the only professional output for us. There might be something to be learned from that,
Yeah. Tom, what's your thoughts?
The problem would be with a properly off-grid Christian community that you're not able to return and fulfill Matthew 28's mission to go to the people, to tell them the gospel, to baptize them. As I understand it, off-grid would literally mean like finding a forest, and it's very hard to do in the UK because it's quite crowded. But and living with minimal interaction with the world away from you. I just think that we still have a duty to witness to the secular world, because Christ commanded it, and we shouldn't lightly lay that aside. And indeed, the persecution that might well come our way because of that is part of the witness. He says, when you are persecuted, just the Holy Spirit will give you the words. And the countless times through Acts where we see Paul arrested and then for proclaiming Christ, and then that gives him an opportunity to proclaim Christ to even more people and for more believers. So, I'm fundamentally an optimist. I believe that the gates of hell will not prevail against Christ's church, and I'm actually quite optimistic, a little bit more optimistic than maybe some about where we are. At the moment, there are still robust protections which are being used more and more against your employer firing you because you hold Christian beliefs. There's that lady recently we talked about her last week, almost certainly who campaigned for a Christian elected as a Christian for a mayoral position, and has been fired from her job with the housing association because of the Christian position on marriage. But almost certainly that will not hold. She will win that court case. Because they still can't do that. They're not allowed to. So I don't think we're quite there yet as a necessity. And I would worry, as I say, about complete withdrawal. That said, we should have Christian communities, and I love the idea of a sort of Anglican version of the Brudenhof community where we all live together.
Yeah, I can definitely see you sort of churning your own butter and raising a barn, Tom.
I've got plans actually for the southern-facing slope at the end of my garden. If I grow my own vines there, I could barter them with the farmer across the valley who's growing barley, so that I can make bread and he could have a few bottles of wine. And
according to Martin Lewis Money expert, you might be doing that in a few months too.
Well, I know, quite, yeah. So I need the bread and the wine in order to celebrate the Eucharist, of course. That's my plan, and then I can keep my ministry going, sacramental ministry.
Nice one. A serious point. I think there's also something to add to that, which is that I still think that people who feel that they're able to should be politically engaged in what's going on as much as possible, and to try and preserve as much as it's possible a Christian vision of this nation. And I do think the situation is really, really bad, and it's getting worse all the time. I have to say, I don't have any illusions about that, but that doesn't mean that we should disengage entirely. It just means that we should. It means that we should just recall what a Christian vision of society actually could be, and maybe there's an intellectual task there as well. To recall it, to understand it, to remind other people of it, and to try and keep that idea alive as much as is possible.
Well, you can see on the back of that how you might also have traditional Christian communities, whether it's I can never quite pronounce it, but Brudenhof.
It's not the Bruder. It's the Bruderhome.
Sorry, Bruderhome.
Bruderhome, or Cistercian monasteries. There can be an advantage to some off-grid living in community. They provide spaces of strategic retreat, intense learning.
But I think,
they can be places where individuals are sent out from.
Yeah. I think the strongest monasteries and the most impactful religious communities of the Middle Ages were the ones where there was a sort of outward-looking sense. The Dominican friars, the Franciscans, the itinerant preachers and ministers of the medieval world. Whereas, they're the ones that have survived to the 21st century, aren't they? I don't know. Are there any enclosed communities? Not in Anglicanism anyway. It's been frowned upon for this very reason. I think there probably still are Cistercian monks, are there?
I think we're slightly in danger of becoming a bit too esoteric in terms of going into a kind of critique of monasticism in general. I think the principle is pretty clear, and I would say also, contradicting what I just said, I think it is the case that in general in the West, monks have been very outward looking, and the idea that this is a kind of enclosed thing which is shut off from the world is just a fiction. It's not true at all.
So there were always guest houses on the monasteries that they would
and monasteries were like
travelers.
They were like hospitals and almshouses and all this kind of stuff. It's not at all the case that they were
and in many ways in our Western culture, where the Benedictines have dropped off, the Buddhists have picked up.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been replaced by the state,
Yeah.
But anyway, I think this is an interesting question. I think it is it might sound a bit sort of kooky to begin with, but I think that this is definitely something that Christians need to be aware of. The changing context of our culture and how easy or not it's going to be to continue to live a faithful Christian life, and whether or not, like you're saying, Daniel, if things continue to move in this direction, it might be necessary to band together in a little bit more of an intentional way than you would say just in a church community. You might need something a bit more, some kind of more formal or creative Benedict option style community that can help us continue to live faithful Christian life and get through whatever it is that we need to get through. I think that's true. Listen, chaps, we've gone on probably for as long as we should today. So thank you. Just to say to people, if you have enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support us, you can do so on a monthly basis by going to patreon.com/Irreverend, and you can support us for as little as £1.50 a month, plus VAT in the UK. And we chuck in the episodes free they're already free early. As well, as soon as we finish making them, so you generally get them 2 or 3 days early. Or if you can't do that, you just like to make a one-off donation, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/Irreverend, and all of these addresses are in the show notes down there if you're watching, or just down there if you're listening below the podcast. So do go to Patreon or buy me a coffee, make a contribution if you'd like to. You can email the show at irreverendpod@gmail.com. And we do like getting your emails, and we read them out occasionally as well. Follow us on Twitter at irreverendpod, or on our Telegram group, where I'm sharing quite a lot of stuff on Telegram. It's great having basically hundreds of people you can just post to, if you want like a film recommendation, or you want to make a comment about something, or you want to ask a question. It's fantastic. So t.me/irreverend. To join our Telegram group and receive regular updates, and to give Tom advice on where he's going to go on holiday and all that kind of stuff. So that's it, really. Anything else from you, chaps?
Nope.
Or should we do a prayer? Who wants to pray? Anyone? Daniel, go on.
Daniel.
Well, I'll do a prayer. Heavenly Father, may in these days and weeks ahead, may we be aware of your presence. May we walk the way of your Son, Jesus Christ. May our hearts be open always to the promptings of your Holy Spirit. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks to our listeners, of course. Thank you, Daniel and Tom.
Bless you.
Okay. See you again next time.